Everybody, just gonna have some other people joining, and I'll be letting them in as we get going, but we can definitely get started here. Thanks everybody for joining the conversation today. I'm Brad McCabe with Sponsor Circle, and really happy to have Humble Howard from the Humble and Fred Show and Jim Perry from the Rod Pedersen Show joining the conversation today. But before we get into it, love to promote our next session coming up in December. We're going to have Dana Gladstone from Hockey Canada and Joanne Stencil from Sofina Foods talking about sponsorship investment in women's sport, and particularly looking at the Jane's All In program with the women's hockey team last year and then repeating again this year. So information will be coming out following the session today about that and how you can register, and look forward to having you join us again in December. But really pleased to have the conversation today talking about podcasts, bringing branded content into conversations, how that's shaping in podcast and podcast sponsorship. And we've got some long-standing individuals who've been in the podcast space. I know from having listened to the Humble and Fred Show, they quite often quote themselves as the pioneers of podcasting and having been doing it before anybody knew what podcasts were. So we've got Humble Howard, who's half the Humble Fred Show, and also half of the Swing Thoughts podcast, focused on golf, and radio entertainment personality, comedian. I guess we can go through the whole list of where you've been, Howard. And then as well, we've got Jim Perry, who works as the national sales manager for the Rod Pedersen Show, which is a 2-hour sports broadcast done daily across Canada. So Jim, why don't I hand it over to you to do a bit more of an introduction to yourself.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, so as mentioned, so I manage the sales programming for DuPont Media, who produces the Rod Pedersen Show. And we dubbed the show as Canada's daytime sports talk show. It's a multi-format show that's broadcast on TV, but it's also available in podcast format, and it's parsed out over our social channels and available on demand audio at rodpedersen.com. And so before joining DuPont, I worked in sponsorship and media partnerships for just over 20 years. I'm, from Western Canada, as Howard is, as he didn't disclose yet, but nevertheless, yeah. So I've just my whole thing is development, revenue development, in support of media and sponsorship.
Very nice. Thank you, Jim. Brad, thanks for inviting me, and good to see my friend, a guy I know through friends, Ted Bird. Hi, Ted. How are you?
I'm well. Why? What have you heard?
I've heard good things about you, young man. In fact, the reason that I'm in radio with Fred is because of Ted Bird. It's a long story, but the short of it is I was living in Los Angeles doing stand-up, and a friend of mine was working, I think, with Ted, a guy named Jeff Lumbee. We were just talking about him before the show, and Jeff said, hey, this guy I'm working with has left. Do you want to get back into radio? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. What's the job? Anyway, long story short, I came to Montreal, and from Montreal, I was hired in Toronto to work with Fred. The Humble and Fred Show has been on the air since 1989, and as a podcast for the last 10 years. I've been a radio guy, a television guy, a comic, and in the last 10 years, I've become, I've uploaded more podcasts. What do we say? We're not the most popular podcast in Canada, but we are the most uploaded podcast in Canadian podcast history. We're closing in on 3,000 episodes.
Which is, just incredible. You think about the number of episodes.
It's obnoxious is what it is, Brad. It's ridiculous.
Well, you keep putting yourself out there.
But I'll tell you my experience as a radio guy, and I know there's a lot of ex-broadcasters that are now trying to do the podcast thing. And I can tell you, we've been, we had a bit of success in Toronto, and I've enjoyed some success as a broadcaster, but I can tell you the podcast format for us, and maybe Ted will talk about this too, because I know you're doing one. It's the most satisfying broadcasting I've ever been part of. Now, I've never done, I've done some talk radio, but in terms of being able to broadcast yourself, this format is by far the most satisfying. That is my introduction. Oh, and finally, Jim, yes, I'm from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, so you'll have to speak slower. Okay? You happy now?
Yes. Well, yeah, sort of.
Okay.
And I work on Toronto speed, so I'll need to slow down for Calgary and Moose Jaw speed.
No, exactly.
I think, coming out of that, I mean, you've got such a wealth of experience working broadcast radio, and you've had stints on TV, and Jim, the experience that Rod's had, as a TV broadcaster, how has that ported over well into the podcast streaming world?
Do you want me to take this, Rod or Howard?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Well, it's lend itself well to the direction of the industry. Because we're a multi-format show that's available on broadcast format, both in radio and television, digital channels through both live streams, but also just via post on Instagram, Facebook, whatever the supporting channels that your property has. It's an evolution that I think you have to adopt. But you don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's still value in these traditional channels. And so these new platforms work well. So I think I think that it's something that you when Rod left radio and they started the show, and it was by way of accident. It was just by way of his contract clauses that he could not start a radio show 3-4 years ago. He had to start it, and so they were creative in the approach, and podcast was basically where they landed, and broadcasting it live. So it was a bit by accident, but it really was the best thing that could have ever happened to the programming, because it's really given us a lot of opportunity to go in different directions in how we build programs.
I was just trying to think while you were talking, Jim, about my experience. One thing about doing a podcast versus being a radio guy or doing stuff on TV, because you've got such latitude and you can go in any direction. One of the things that helped us is that when we started, and I was in a similar situation, when we did our very first podcast was 2006. Yeah, that's right. It was called an internet radio show. And we did a few of them because Fred and I found ourselves fired and we had a no compete. Mine was 27 months. And so in that 27 months, Fred was doing what he was doing, and we'd get together every once in a while and do a podcast. Then both of us got radio jobs separately. And then we found ourselves fired again in 2011 and was like, okay, let's get together and do a podcast. And we've said this on our show many times, kind of with the idea that, hey, no one's really heard us together in 4 or 5 years. This might be a nice audition to remind the industry that, hey, we're still a morning show and we could be hired. And so through those 10 years from 2011 till now, we had radio properties. We were on Sirius XM for 5 years. We had some syndicated deal. We were on 4 or 5 radio stations. And I'm going to get to the point, which is, but what we did that saved us is all the way through that, whatever broadcast we were doing, we also did a podcast. Now in the Sirius XM years, where we could, swear if we wanted to and use whatever language we wanted to, and it wasn't as formatted. We basically just did a 2-hour radio show on Sirius and then edited out a couple of the commercial breaks, because there was a few, and then put that up as a podcast. So all the way through the 10 years, we basically took this podcast and we brought our sort of radio experience, which is do it every day, put it up at the same time, take it seriously, prepare for it, get guests. And so it sort of grew that way because we wanted it to be, maybe Ted would relate to this. The discipline you need to do an everyday radio show is not something that all podcasters are familiar with. I know Rod is because he comes from radio. Ted and Terry come from radio, but there's a real discipline, I think, that's in all the successful podcasts. They treat it seriously. On the other hand, all the comics and friends of mine and ex-radio guys that came to us and said, hey, can we use your studio or whatever? We said, sure. And then, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 12 episodes in, they find out it's super hard and they just give it up. So that was sort of the experience that was the best part of being an ex-radio guy, is that we had the discipline of knowing what it feels like to do it every day.
Yeah, and I guess what comes a part of that is, putting 3,000 podcasts up, there's a dedication to doing it before you're actually getting any revenue in. And I'm wondering whether you get that mix of, how long do you stick it out and, dedicate yourself to doing it before it actually starts to wane and people lose interest and step away.
Yeah, it really is the first or second, usually 1A in terms of questions that people ask us. I don't know how many of you people on here are doing podcasts or producing them, but usually the first or second question I get asked is, how did you guys monetize it? And you're right. If you can't make money doing it, and I don't know what Rod's experience was, but it's a tough road to hoe if you're doing it to try and make a living at it. The short answer for us is we had pretty good brand equity in the market, and we didn't make any money for about 6 to 7 months. And we had a very short severance. Both of us had about a 6 month out severance. So we started in October of 2011. We cashed our first check probably in April or May, and it wasn't for very much. But little by little, a couple of things happened. Ted and I worked. Did you work for Slate? Of course you did, right? Yeah. So a guy that we all worked for heard about it, and it was brand new, and he had a little extra money. He sold his company for $1 billion. And so, so he had a little extra money, Brad, and he kind of helped us out with a sponsorship. And it was the first bit of money that helped pay the rent and help buy us equipment. And he also gave us a bit of credibility because people thought, oh, if he's buying time on this show, maybe I will too. And so little by little, the first sponsor got the second sponsor, got the third sponsor, and so on. But it took a while, and it took us a while, I'd say 2 or 3 years before we were making enough, maybe 2 years, to sort of stop delving into our savings to supplement whatever we were making. I don't know, Jim, what's your experience?
Well, it's not a whole lot different from how you describe. Sponsorship, as most people who attend these talks and have been in the industry for a long time, it's a long sales cycle, right? I think, and I can only speak for what I've been told by way of broadcasters such as Rod and Darren DuPont, that a lot of broadcasters get in this business don't quite understand the revenue side. And I think you have to really have a good sense of what your brand is. So if you are building your brand, you have to really understand who's in your crosshairs, like who's going to reflect your brand and who will want to partner with you. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get into bed with the wrong brands either, right? Because that will affect your long-term value. So,
well, excuse me if I may interrupt. Early on, we had a Rub and Tug as a sponsor, so we didn't give a shit, to be honest with you. I'm not even kidding. You're right. We had no compunction about taking money because early on we were just desperate to keep the lights on. But we definitely looked for people that A, had heard of us, B, had a good sort of sense memory, and also wanted to be part of the kind of show that we were creating.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, of course, it's a balance. You definitely, you got to keep the lights on. You got to pay for rent and eat. But I think just owning that path really helps. And it's easy
Yeah.
it's easy to kind of lay that out in a rather academic way, but it like our experience has been first, out of the gates before I was involved with the show. They started very local and very small, but it's been an evolution and really just understanding, where the value is, and it takes time.
Yeah, and it sounds like from both the experiences, starting local, starting small, and the slate comment, that it seems to be it's a friends and family conversation when you first get started. It's who you know and what you can do, as opposed to trying to crack somebody you've never had a conversation with.
100%.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, part of the challenge for us, and again, I don't know the experience of the people on this call, but when we started, from 2006 to 2011, we probably did about 15 of them, where we just got together at our buddy Dan's place, recorded them, put them out on the internet. I don't even think we called them podcasts. Maybe they were, but when we actually went into business for ourselves, which is kind of what this is a small little company. We have 5 or 6 employees, and it's grown into the kind of business where we have benefits and all this other nonsense. But when we started, part of our challenge was to go to our friends and family with our phones and say, hey, here's how you can listen to our show. And they'd be like, what? I go, yeah. And Fred and I talk about this all the time. We would literally take people. I would run into people every day, Brad and Jim and everyone. They say, hey, Humble, Fred, where are you guys now? Where can I listen to you? And I'd say, well, you can listen to me right now here. And it was almost that ground, sort of grassroots, where we're little by little, we showed enough people where we were, and they told enough other people, hey, that show that we used to love is now on our phones or on our computers. And it wasn't until I had this conversation with Jim, it wasn't until quite recently, and I mean 2-3 years, where enough people could tell you their favorite podcast. And that moment meant that some of the people in agencies and guys like Jim Perry and other agencies, all of a sudden were like looking for podcast properties. Because prior to that, it was not just friends and family for advertising, it was friends and family to show them what a podcast was. So we're kind of at an interesting moment, because in our 10 years of doing this, we've never been busier. In the last 20 months since the pandemic, we've had the biggest increase in our audience, and we've never had more sponsorship interest or sponsors on our show. But it took a long time to get there. I think for people starting out now, the advantage is they don't have to go through that process where when they talk about, I can see some of you guys look like you're doing some podcasts there. Josh, is that a podcast behind you that I'm seeing? I can't see the name for your head there, Josh. What does that say?
It's big. I work for a charity on behalf of a charity. So it's Big Brothers, Big Sisters of North and West Niagara in Niagara, Ontario, Canada.
But if you're doing a podcast now, let's say for Big Brothers, you don't have to explain to people what a podcast is. Most people can go, yeah, I listen to Smartless or Mark Maron or Joe Rogan. I go to Joe Rogan for all my medical advice. That's what I do.
For Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers, right. But here's the thing. I'll just finish by saying that early on, I went to we had a gentleman that used to work for, I don't know, Ted Bird. You ever run into a guy named Bill Hertz? Do you remember that name?
Yeah, I remember the name. He was a sales guy, wasn't he?
He was the national sales guy for Standard.
Yeah.
And after he retired and we started up, he was just looking for something to do. And he took us to a few agencies, big agencies in Toronto. And the people in charge of the agencies, the people in their 40s and 50s, they all knew who we were. But all the media buyers, or kids in their late 20s, mid 20s, had no idea who we were, which is fine. But this was 10 years ago. They had no idea what a podcast was. And so the agency, which we thought was going to be a soft landing for us, it wasn't. Until this year, we finally started getting some agency interest. because all of a sudden those agencies are now looking to podcasts. And Jim and I've had this conversation. You know, it's tough to sell something if people don't know what that thing is. And the show that Jim works for, yeah, lots of people know who Rod is, but if you don't know what a podcast is, how are you going to advertise on it? So part of that challenge now has been taken care of because most people have at least on the surface heard of one, gusting to they've got some of their favorites.
Yeah, and that certainly makes a big difference when you don't have to spend half your conversation in the sales process explaining what you do.
Yes.
And I, just thinking about the evolution of where all those agencies are coming from, and you start seeing agencies like Anchor Sponsorship, Anchor Podcasts, and my understanding is both of you guys are still, independently selling all of your sponsorship. And have you been approached by agencies who are doing this blanket conversation for ad placement?
Jim, you answer this first, because I've had, first of all, Jim is now working for the Humble and Fred Show. I'm very excited to have him on board. But yeah, I'll tell you we've been approached a few times in the last couple of years by podcast aggregators, and I'll explain why we didn't take that. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so have we been approached? Is that what you're asking?
Have you been approached, and what's the engagement look like?
Well, anytime an agency comes to you, you understand that they're making money on top of what they're pitching to you. So we have had engagement, and we've taken upon it just, because, we need to keep the lights on, the doors open, so to speak. But very much a part of our sales and growth strategy is about reaching out to agencies and explaining to them, who we are, what the offering is. Is it media? Is it sponsorship? Is it both? How does that all fit together? As part of that evolution, we've had to do a media audit by an agency to basically support our numbers, because so many media planners and buyers lean so heavily on numbers, especially in the digital space. We just had to get a number. We had to arrive at a number, and and what demographics are tuning in, so to speak. It's that's taken time, but also just it's starting to trickle back. I had an agency out of Toronto come back to us this morning saying we're planning in a month and let's connect then. And that was based on a reach out of 2-3 months ago. So does it happen overnight? No, but it's still very much a important part of getting on plans to start that discussion. So yes, to answer your question, yes, it's working both ways. But ideally, we, as a lot of you would, it's always better to work client direct, but you still need to have those agency partnerships, because so many of the larger buys are going to come through an agency, either sponsorship or media related.
So a couple of times in the last few years, some agencies have popped up. Let me just put a pin in that for a second. A few things have popped up. Companies that have decided to say, hey, why don't we get Humble and Fred, Ted and Terry, Jerry and Brother Jake, and get about 10 podcasts, and we'll put them all together, and then we'll sell the numbers, and we'll insert spots in the roll. And a couple of times we came close to making those deals. And I would just tell you, again, I'm referring to Ted because I know that Ted and Terry Damonte, a very fine broadcaster, both of them are very experienced, have just started a podcast. My advice is, if you've got enough local market equity, I would sell direct for as long as you can. The problem with being part of a group of podcasts is, again, it's getting enough critical mass for it to make you money. I guarantee you, in the city of Montreal, enough people know who Terry and Ted are, just like Humble and Fred, that you could make some good little inroads just getting people who know who you are. And later I'll explain what our first rule was, which is, how we sort of sucked clients in. to answer your question though, Brad, we finally got an agency this year in February of 2021. Small agency approached us, and we thought it was time to let somebody else represent us, because for the last 10 years, all the selling has been done either by this gentleman I mentioned, Bill Hertz, or me. But Bill was with us for a couple of years. So most of it's come through either me or some PR agencies that we will once in a while align ourselves with. As far as the agency goes, Jim's right. I mean, he's taking his percentage on top of our buy, but we just thought we finally had enough critical mass in terms of numbers that we would be an attractive buy for some outside, you know, sort of didn't know who Humble and Fred were money. So from them, we've got DraftKings, Bodog, Government of Ontario, 2 or 3 other smaller clients. But those are the, and just people buying us solely on the numbers we have, not who we are. Like, some of them knew who we were, but they were just part of a buy in the US. They went, oh, this guy's representing us. And then that's how we got those clients. But in the beginning, it was all sold directly to people that knew who we were.
And does that conversation, or maybe it's morphed over time, was it a radio sales conversation, or was it, I mean, and Jim, you could probably speak a lot to it in terms of media versus sponsorship, you know, the types of conversation you'd have versus when you're going into the buyer and trying to explain, here's what we're offering?
It's been an education in even dealing with the most seasoned of media buyers and planners. I won't name the brand, but it's an organization that we just started working with, and we've integrated them into the show as part of a content partnership. And as part of the fulfillment, I just said, you know, like, what have you done elsewhere with this sort of activation? And they said, honestly, Jim, I've been doing this for 30 years. We've never done it, you know, and it's just like, wow. And she's been in media for years. And and it's just like, it just goes to show you how there's a lot of catch up right now. I think there's a lot of organizations and agencies and you know, marketing leads for brands that are just getting their head wrapped around this space. And you know, how do you piece a program together, and you know, where is the low hanging fruit? What's going to get you paid? And it's, you know, it's a combination, as Howard indicated. It's you know, it's the aggregated buys, it's the in-show content partners. You have to kind of keep all these channels open, and be mindful of where it's going to work, and also be mindful of what, you know, again, like Howard's built a brand, and people have come to expect it, and so you have to make sure that whoever you're bringing on is kind of in line with that. I'm a big believer in that, because there's a lot of passion. Like I'm an avid podcast listener, and I'm happy to say that I'm started listening to the Humble and Fred show. It's great. Not great if you're well,
Go ahead, Jim.
just depends where your politics lies, but mine are in line with Howard's. So, but yeah, it's a passion play. So I think for a lot, there's an opportunity to talk to people, and the brands that align. There's conversions there, you know, for businesses to make real money aligning with personalities like Howard.
Well, I'll tell you, early on, we had this idea, and it partly came because we only had 1 or 2 clients. And so it was easy to stop in the middle of an interview with somebody and say, well, just hang on a second there, you know, guest. That reminds me of, and then we would do the live read right in the middle of the interview. And then we thought, you know, for most people, that's all they want to hear us do the commercials. Because, you know, as we can tell you from commercial radio, I don't know, and if Ted has ever, in your experience, but it's rare for the morning guys or the jocks to do live reads. Although years ago, that's how radio existed. All the announcers read the commercials. So we thought, well, that's what we should do. So even though most of the time we had a podcast, we were also on some platform. So we would sell our clients two things. We'd say, on the radio, we'll give you 30-second spots, just as a giveaway. But the real secret sauce is us doing the reads. And that continues. Like this summer we had, like we're at about 6 clients right now, but it gusts between 6 and 10. Now 10's gets a bit crowded, because if you're stopping, as Brad's heard the show, I'm sure, sometimes it gets a little bit much. But when you can stop, and clients love this, where they know you're not just reading the copy, you're talking about the experience, you're talking about them like they're part of the show. And the cool thing is, then the audience responds like they are. I was telling Jim when we first started talking a few weeks ago, we've got three of our 6 clients right now have been with us longer than 4 years. That's absurd. Radio is sold in 13-week increments. To have somebody on that long, it's not just that they like us, legacy clients, but they continue to get activity because our audience, even though it's smaller, say, than it was when we were the morning show on the edge, but it is the most active audience I've ever been part of. The way they respond to what we talk about, and the fact that if we say, hey, our newest sponsor, Doer, the poster behind me, for a pair of pants right now, you can get 15% off at checkout. And they just keep ringing that bell. It's crazy, because it's not just a bunch of commercials in a sea of commercials. It's us stopping. We had Stephen Page on yesterday. In the middle of Stephen Page, we went, hey, don't forget Stephen's the Gigs Guy guest of the day. And we started talking about Gigs Guy. Well, that has a lot more impact than, we'll be right back after these messages. And then 7 minutes later, with 14 30-second spots, the show continues. Whereas our show, once we start, it never stops till we're done. And in that body, we do all the client stuff. So that's been super effective for us. I don't know about you guys, but doing live reads in the show has been the thing that's made us the most money.
I have 2 appendages to those comments. One is a longtime show partner, Great Western Brewery, which is based out of the West. It's somewhat of a national brand now, but they've been with us since the beginning. And it started just as Howard described, 30-second broadcast television spots, just on a loop, basically. And it was done locally by some account reps, and then it trickled its way up to the marketing director, and he's like, "Hey, whoa, wait, what are we doing? Like, this is just noise. It's white noise. It's not doing anything. We need to shift. Do you guys want to keep us on board?" And so we started integrating them into the show. We built in social channels where we'd have viewers send in pictures, and we'd show the pictures on the show. Just reporting from the weekend, we'd use the Great Western hashtag, and they love it, because it's a big part of our show, of the Rod Pedersen Show, is fan engagement. We have a viewer takeover segment where people are on YouTube, or we were streaming on Facebook as well, but people are just on the comment section, and Rod reads from it, and that's how you get engagement, and where the equity comes in, and it's sincere, and it builds off the content of the show. So, but that was a process, and yes, the media has some value. There's some kind of subconscious equity that you're building by just having those ads run, but the secret sauce is in show integration. That works. That's transparent. It's not forced. The liner reads are organic. They're off the cuff. That's where you're gonna get engagement. One of our most recent partners, the second part to this appendage, is Taco Time. Taco Time has come on board, and the way it started was Rod and Darren talking about their favorite food court brands. Mm-hmm. And without a nanosecond passes, and Rod's like, Taco Time, crisp meat burrito, side of Mexican fries, and he's just going off. And we posted it to Twitter, and there's like 30 comments. Oh yeah, I totally love that. I send that to the marketing manager. I go, we need to have you guys on the show.
No, that's perfect.
And now they're on the show because it's Rod loves taco time.
Well, I mentioned that's how we got the Rub and Tug client, because Fred couldn't stay away from this place. And I said, Jesus Christ, Fred. I mean, if you're going there every other day, could you maybe talk to them about coming on the show?
It's too bad Jilly's closed, hey?
The truth is, we had this woman, really super smart woman that was part of, we used to have this feature called the Panel of Men. And then every other week we'd have the Panel of Women. And we would just discuss issues. And this woman that we met, who turned out to own a couple of Rub and Tugs, she was just super smart, and she had a great story and great content. And she said, listen, I'd like to have, one of your commercials if we could. I said, well, it's not really our thing, but sure. And for probably the better part of a year, she paid us a small fee for us to just shout out every other show, go to Muse Massage Spa. Do you remember that, Brad? Have you been around that long?
I do remember when you would have her on. I was thinking about some of the content.
She was great content, but she would eventually she paid us to come on and promote her locations. But it is the best advertising that we've ever had, are the clients that just want us to talk about their product. And the second part of that equation is, if it's the right client, to let them come on the show. So that's been another way that we've integrated clients into our show. Is it's not for everybody, but the first one we did it with was the guy from Pizza. What's his name? Pat Finelli. So Pat Finelli was the perfect Humble and Fred client. Big ego, lots of money, no accountability. So, because we had that Pizza was our client for about 3 years. And I guarantee you, the reason they stayed on that long is that Pat loved to come on the show. Big ego, loved to hear himself talk, like us all. But he had no idea whether we sold one pizza or not. Didn't care. Just loved the vibe of the show, kept the sponsorship going, probably longer than it needed to be. But he was like, that was sort of the template for us to go and say, hey, you could do what Pat's doing. And so that's another sort of avenue of revenue that that wasn't available to us as radio guys. The other thing that's a big value add for podcasters versus morning guys or radio people is that I just had a conversation with a potential client last week, and I said, one of the great things for all of us, there's about 4 of us on the call. I said, if you guys decide on a Friday that starting Monday, you want to change the ad, or you want to put on a promotion, or any number of things, you just text me. You send me an email, call me, we'll do it. But as any radio person would tell you, if you're a client, you're not even going to talk to the morning guy. You're not going to talk to the announcer, let alone decide on a whim that you want to start, another promotion on Monday. But in our world, one of the things we're selling is access to the show on every level. Like I've had several promotions where I got up in the morning on a Monday and somebody sent me a note saying, hey, this week, would you mind, can we promote this thing? Because it's something, I said, sure, whatever you want. So that's another nice thing, is that you're selling them. There's not a program director, sales manager, promotion director. You're coming to those people directly, or, Rod's case, going through Jim, but it's you get a chance to really be part of that show in a way that isn't available to broadcasters.
And I guess from your end, how do you balance, your creative elements and the creative juices that you've got as a team, to having somebody come in, whether they're talking about Chambers Insurance or Gig Sky or something that may be a little different from where you're headed?
Well, that's a little thing called editing, Brad. But well, what we do, and this isn't the clients sort of know this. Like, we basically have the clients on, all of them are at the end of the show. So we tend to have them all after the sort of guests have been on, and sort of at the 90-minute mark of the show, or the hour 15 mark, or whatever. Then we have a client on, and yes, it's not always easy to have a conversation about insurance, or financial stuff. But, you know, it's interesting. We try and make it interesting, and they're all pretty short. They're 5-minute spots. And then what we'll do is we'll do them, and then we have another feature at the end of our show, and then we'll just edit it and switch it. So yeah, if you're listening to us live, you hear them in chronological order. But if you're downloading the podcast, you don't hear the sponsor until the very last element of the show. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not for everyone. And by the way, I even tell potential clients that, you know, because in our deck, in our promotional material, it says clearly you get a live appearance every other week. But oftentimes I'll say, if you don't have the right person, you may not want that, because if it's the wrong person, it can suck so badly that it's worse for you than if you didn't do it at all.
Yeah, I try and police that as well. You know, if they suggest that and they're like, oh, what about having so-and-so on the show? And I'm like, don't know if that works, you know?
Yeah. Again, we've had some clients that were great at it. Finelli was great at it. You know, there's been several. We had a wine sponsor for a few years, and it was a nice little segment. They would come on and they would talk about a certain, you know, it was sort of relatable and was easy, but some of it can be a bit, you know, a bit dreadful. But again, you know, money is money, and I'm not going to say no.
Like maybe Mel Lastman or his son.
Listen,
Bad Boy Furniture.
I would take dead Mel Lastman money. Absolutely, I would.
And I guess looking at the different formats of how the money's coming in, and you know, you've got the promo codes that are always being offered in terms of affiliate.
Yes.
And how do you balance the affiliate payment versus
We don't
straight
do
cash?
it. I'll tell you right now. I told Jim this. I'll tell all you guys on this. We take no per inquiry money. None. Won't do it. I'm assuming if you don't know what that is, and it's been offered us several times. Mostly American companies want per inquiry. Right now, we're about to do a thing with Jim for a company called Manscaped, and they're a big per inquiry type of client, but we're not. Our particular deal won't be, but per inquiry basically says we'll pay you for everybody that buys our product. And what we always say is, okay, pay us, and then if they buy give us a promo code. So there's some accountability, but it doesn't. We're not predicating. It's not predicated on the amount of money. I just won't do it, because early on we didn't have enough numbers to make it worth our while, and then when we did, we didn't really need to do it. But I would caution anyone against doing it. If you're Joe Rogan, Mark Maron, Smartless, you can do it because you're getting enough critical mass. But if you're doing the kind of numbers that we do in Canada, it can really expose you. And I just don't think it's worth your while. I don't know, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a volume game. And you really do need to have the critical mass. I think the sweet spot is kind of what we just spoke on, is you know where your passion lies, and getting those partners that live and breathe your brand and align well, you know, like the Taco Times, like the Great Westerns of the world. That's your affiliate partnerships are, you know, they can be a nice add-on, but really the value is your content sponsorships,
Yes.
where it aligns. Like that's what we're talking about today, how sponsorship applies to podcasting. It's less about the transactional media assets that are a part of a sponsored program and help and are a part of the big picture, you know, just depending on what the objectives of the marketer is. But yeah, like from a core, pay to play,
I'll tell you, Jim, we were on Sirius XM for 5 years as well. So that was our podcast. Every day we did the show on Sirius. So we're heard all over North America. And we got approached by a company, maybe you guys have heard of it, called Squatty Potty. It's the big Stern sponsor. And by the way, I still believe in the product. It makes you poo so much better. I just go ahead, just take my advice. But they approached us for a per inquiry buy. And I got to know them because they're a small company with a big, you know, they run it like a small mom and pop shop, even though it's quite a big company. So I actually got to speak to the people that owned it. And I talked them out of the per inquiry part. I said, listen, we'll take less money and we'll do a better job for you if you're not paying us on every time somebody buys a Squatty Potty. I said, we just don't have the numbers. I was being honest. And this was even when we were on Sirius, because, you know, being on satellite radio on a comedy channel is fine, but unless you're Stern or Opie and Anthony at the time, the numbers would surprise you how small they are. Like, I don't know, you know, like I keep referencing Ted and Terry because Ted's there, but Terry Damonte's morning show numbers in Montreal alone would be bigger than anybody on satellite radio on the comedy channel, except for Stern and Opie and Anthony. I mean it. Like, the numbers are really small. That being said, when our podcast numbers started to outgrow our satellite numbers, then we sort of wondered, well, why are we doing this other than the ego part of it? Like being able to open up I'm sitting here I'm in my house and getting calls from Charleston and Los Angeles, and that was kind of cool, but it didn't make us any more money. And so again, I reiterate that per inquiry, what is the actual per inquiry or affiliate marketing or affiliate money isn't the way to do it. And if you can avoid it, just stay away from it because it won't make any money.
No, that's good to know, because I mean, that gets handed out so freely.
Yes,
because they want that marketing exposure with no commitment.
And again, I don't know if, you know, I know where we rank in terms of listenership. And again, it's if we couldn't make it work, I don't know who's going to. I mean, maybe some CBC numbers out there, or, you know, maybe some of the radio stations that have podcasts as part of their programming. You know, I know Derringer here in Toronto has a big podcast, but you know, when you're on Q107, when you're on one of the biggest stations in the country, I think it might make sense because you probably have enough numbers. But for most people, just, you know, I think the takeaway is go to people who know you and see if they want to sponsor your show.
Yeah. Yep.
Like if I were working, I'll tell you, Ted, if I were working for you guys, because I know one of the, you know, we just had Terry on our show a couple weeks ago and it was great. And one of the things, you know, I would do if I were working for Terry and Ted is I would just go, who are all the people that I've met in this market that would be most likely to even just give us a try, you know, just because we know you. Because I'll tell you, that model, that Humble and Fred model, Terry and Ted sort of market, guys in the market, there's money to be made doing that. One of the questions I always get asked is, and I got asked recently in a sales meeting was, you know, where geographically do most people listen to you? I said, I'd like to tell you we're a national play, but we're not. We're at 93% of our audience is in the GTA, Southern Ontario, maybe. Another south 10% or less is listening to us outside of Ontario. So I always say, listen, if you're looking for a GTA play, or in your case, Ted, a Montreal sponsorship, it's the best kind. But if you're looking for a national play, we're not it. We're just not. And we don't sell it like that.
That's refreshing to hear, because for us, that was very much when I was asked to piece together a new sales strategy. It was a bit of a hard reset, but what I told them, I'm like, look, I know we're dubbed as Canada's daytime sports talk show, and we are seen across the country on broadcast television. However, Rod's brand is in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba.
Yep.
And you know, and it grows from there. And it, you know, and so it's, you know, we're heading in that direction, but you have to look at it from a right now perspective.
No, Jim, there's nothing wrong. Like, we called the show Canada's National Morning Show for years as a joke. And because we wanted to see, we were branding it a national show, but we sold it as a local product.
Yeah. Well, you need to. Yeah.
Because those are the people who know us.
Yeah.
By the way, I think this is going incredibly well. I don't know about you people, but I am. I'm so happy. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, feel free to drop some questions into,
Do you have any
into
Ted,
chat.
I feel like I've been talking to Ted. God damn it. Did you really work with Lumbee? Me and Ted have PTSD from working with Lumbee all these years.
Well, listen, he's got the last laugh. He's retired in the south of France.
I know. I'm talking to him. I'm talking to him tomorrow, Ted. We have the me and Lumbee have a chat every couple of weeks. I'll tell him that you and I got to together.
Tell him I say hi.
I
I would like to reiterate what you're saying about local sponsors. Terry and I have been in this market for 1,000 years, and we went right away. We went to people who know us and who we have longstanding relationships with. And we got 3 sponsors right out of the gate, and none of them blinked. And our title sponsor is Jaguar Land Rover Laval. So we have a title sponsor that has a very prominent brand. So, but if we had gone to Jaguar Land Rover Corporate or Jaguar Land Rover Canada, they wouldn't have known us from a hole in the ground. So
absolutely,
we went to who we know. We also got very lucky because when Terry's retirement was announced, a couple of Montreal comedians named Pantelis and Mike Ward came to us, and you probably know Mike from the Supreme Court of Canada case. And they've been in the podcast game for about 15 years, I would say, and they've operated at the very highest levels of it. They were with Compound Media for a while, I think, with Anthony Cumia. They've been on the Joe Rogan show. Like, they've moved in the top circles. And they have a great setup in Montreal, a great studio, state of the art. And they said there needs to be a Terry and Ted podcast. And you guys can use our facilities and use our infrastructure. And we don't want any money. Just go get your sponsors and keep all the money yourselves. We just want you on our roster. So we've got the best of both worlds, really. We've been very, very fortunate. And now it's a matter of learning more about the platform and about the podcast game, because it's different from radio. And I think it was Harry Truman said the most important lessons you learn in life are the lessons you learn after you know it all. So that's why I'm here.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when this all started for Fred and I, we would have thought, it's interesting to say, we thought we knew everything because we were the morning guys in Toronto. We'd been a pretty big deal for a long time. And then we started this, and Ted, you'll love this. About 6 months into doing the show, we ended up being at Canadian Music Week. We thought, we'll set up our little podcast there and we'll get to see the people in the industry and let them know what we're doing. And so one afternoon at the Royal York Hotel, Fred and I are hooking up equipment, and we couldn't figure out how this, I said to Fred at one point, I said, didn't we used to have people to do this shit for us? But that being said, doing it yourselves, whether it's learning to run a business, Fred does all the accounting, we set up the studio, we built this soundproofing that's all around where I sit, we built it. And what you said there is so true. It's not the most money we ever made, but it's the best money we ever made. Because, when we finished the show this morning, I didn't have anybody to answer to except him. Like I said, we have a staff of 5 people. And we've learned to do all this stuff. After I started, I was 51 years old when this started. Fred was 55. Now we're guys in our 60s. And somebody was asking us recently about retirement. And Fred said, if we weren't doing this for a living, we'd be doing this for fun anyway. So what are we going to retire from? But I wish you, by the way, Teddy, I wish you with all the best of luck. I know you guys are going to be hugely successful because of the same template that we had, which is people in your market know who you are. And just because Terry's not on the radio anymore doesn't mean that people can't still listen to you.
Well, I'm still on the radio, albeit at a small station. As a matter of fact, this morning I was taking the garbage out during a particularly long song on the morning show, and I thought to myself, what time do you think Stern takes the garbage out on his show?
Oh yeah,
he takes it out during the show, or does he wait until after?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, there's Terry. God damn it, where have you been? I think Terry's an hour late.
Yeah, must have thought it was at 2.
That's
daylight savings issue, I think.
Yeah.
Well, he's in BC.
I know. Hey, Terry, I think I've spent the last 10 minutes talking about you. No, he can't turn his equipment on. That's another thing these guys don't know how to do. No one knows how to turn their equipment on.
Blah, blah, blah.
Hey, Damonte, you want to know something of the last month of shows? And this is, by the way, up against Rick Mercer, Stephen Page, Ron James. I'm trying to think who else was famous. And the former mayor of Mississauga. The highest listening podcast we've had in the last 2 weeks is Terry Damonte.
Come on. Really?
Yeah, bro.
You beat Hazel McCallion, Tara. Way to go.
Yeah, that's
You beat
you know
Hazel.
what? That's impressive. I stand in Hazel's shadow. That's pretty cool.
That's right. And
That's really cool.
twice what Hazel got. I just looked at it now. Good for you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad. And by the way, a lot of people talk to me about it. Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. It was
It's great.
yeah, it was. It's one of the things I've read about the podcast world is don't be afraid to get involved in other podcasts.
You know what else is good? Showing up on time, Terry. You know, this started an hour ago, eh?
Yeah. Hey, great,
Damn it.
great. Glad you could join us for the last 2 minutes and 20 seconds. See you
That's
later,
great.
everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
I listen. I thank you again, Brad, for asking me, and I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about this because I'll tell you, I feel very passionate about it. As I said before, Terry, you know, it's the most fun broadcasting I've ever had the opportunity to do. I haven't done as much talk radio. I did a little bit of it. Fred and I filled in a few times in the last 10 years on, you know, News Talk 1010 in Toronto, and it was funny because we did the podcast that morning, you know, speaking freely, talking, you know, for 25, 30 minutes at a time. Then you go on a news talk station and you're doing a 12-minute segment, a 7-minute segment, a 5-minute segment. And it's, you know, and you're talking about, hey, the bike lanes on Jarvis, and who gives a shit, really? But it is I think you guys are going to have a blast because I think it's the type of broadcasting we all have wanted to do, you know, a large part of our careers.
Yeah, we already, I noticed, you know, we recorded a bunch of episodes in advance, and I noticed on the 10th episode at the end of it, I said to Ted, you know, I feel rejuvenated. I feel, I felt like, you know, I'm being over dramatic, but you know, you kind of feel like a dog that gets let out of the cage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Ted and I were reunited, and there was a joy in that, and there was, you know, it's amazing how you bring in your hesitation with you, and you think, oh, I can't say that, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, yes, I can. I can say anything
That's right.
I want, and that's really, you know, and it's not about saying fuck. I know. It's about having the complete freedom to do as you please, and then when it connects with an audience, geez, that's so it's so gratifying.
Well, it's interesting because you guys are similar to our situation, you know, longtime guys in the market, people who, you know, a pretty passionate audience. Humble and Fred fans were much like yours, you know, small. I mean, you had certainly a more mainstream audience than we did, but our audience was very, very passionate about the show. Yeah. But when we started doing the podcast, two things happened. That passion kind of exploded because I'm telling you that the reaction we get to the type of radio or the broadcasting we're doing now is like nothing I've ever experienced because, and the second part of the equation is when they can hear you being really authentic, because listen, we're all a version of ourselves as radio guys and broadcasters. But as you just described, when you can have a conversation, like a real conversation, that's not 5 minutes long and you got to get to commercials and the news and traffic, and you can actually air stuff out for as long as you want, that really connects with an audience, especially one that's already kind of likes you anyway. Yeah. But now they get to sort of hear, as I always say on our show, what you're hearing now is what Fred and I were talking about during the songs.
Yeah, that's true.
This is the show. No, it is. This is the show we were doing when you were listening to fucking Soundgarden.
Yeah, for the 9 millionth time.
That's right. It's like, this is the show we always did. It just, you never heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fuck, I'm really sorry I missed this because
it's fantastic. This Jim Perry guy knows his shit.
I was sitting in my kitchen looking at the clock going like, oh shit, I got 20 minutes to wait. Idiot. Sorry, guys.
We recorded it for you, so we can send you the recording after.
Okay, great. And also, Ted will fill me in.
Perfect. I can already see Ted is the brains of the operation. No, he told, hey, by the way, congratulations on getting some sponsorship, because, dude, that's not easy. And it is the first thing that brought, I said this off the top, almost all the ex-broadcasters that came through our door, and there were a lot of them, that said, hey, you know, tell us about podcasting, and we would offer our studios to plenty of them. And as I said early on, 3 to 10 episodes into it, a lot of guys give up for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's hard,
Yeah.
doing it, and you've got to prepare it. But the biggest obstacle is, I don't know how we're going to make money. That's really hard.
Yeah. Well, I think you probably talked about it, Ted. We had some, a client that was very loyal to Ted and a client that was very loyal to me over the years. And they're like,
Yep.
we did this little presentation for them and anything. And they're like, yeah, we don't need to see that. We're in. We believe
Nice.
in you guys. And that also was very gratifying.
You know what really sold Jaguar Land Rover Laval, though, Howard, was I was driving down the highway one day before we started the podcast, and a Jaguar drove by. So I called their marketing woman and I said, Adrian, it's Ted Bird. I just saw a Jaguar drive by, and a beautiful Jaguar drive by, and it made me think of you, not because it was a Jaguar, but because it was beautiful.
Wow. Very nice.
Bloody God.
So,
Sales
you knew I was full of
from
shit, but
Ted
she
Bird.
bought in anyway.
I see that Ted's the sizzle.
Yeah.
You're the steak.
That's
I
right.
like
Yeah, it's a TED sales seminar coming up.
There you go. Yeah.
Always be sucking
I'll
up.
take a back
That's
seat.
right.
Ted.
TBS. All right, Brad, is there anything else other than me telling Damonte how much we enjoyed his appearance on our program?
No, this has been fantastic. Thank you everybody for sticking around a little bit extra on the time, because it's been a amazing conversation, and being able to hear where you've come from, and sort of the synopsis of it being it's a passion first, and you got to live your passion and turn it into a business, as opposed to trying to go in with an idea of it being a business first, is really kind of what I pulled from it.
Brad, do we stay here for the next seminar with Matt Kendall, or is that a different link?
That's not part of mine.
Okay.
But so we've got a session coming up in December with Dana Gladstone from Hockey Canada and Joanne Stencil from Sofina Foods. So that'll be a conversation about sponsorship in women's sport, particularly looking at women's hockey team and the national team. So we'll be sending out some information to everybody following this to have you come and join. Really appreciate Howard and Jim, your time and your insights. And I'll give the last words over to you guys.
Jim, I've said all I can say. I have nothing.
Yeah, I kind of thought you might take over that that complex you carry from your Moose Jaw days. It just it comes out in your personality.
By the way, my favorite line in the entire hour was Ted Bird wondering when Stern takes out the fucking garbage. I'm stealing it. I'm going to tell Fred that tomorrow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Howard, were you at the Big 8?
I started at CHAB, Saskatchewan Super 8.
That's right. That was the Moffat farm team.
That was you know what? There were some really good broadcasters there.
Big time.
Lumbee was there.
Yeah.
Dan Duran was there. Danny Kingsbury was there. That was kind of like my university. I went to radio school with those guys, and all four of us have remained friends to this day. And Danny became a programmer, and then a general manager of, I guess, Rogers, and then Dan, of course, is Dan. Then Lumbee, as Ted just he's retired to France. Who called that?
Well, I think Mrs. Lumbee might have had a lot to do with it.
No, exactly. Seriously, the guy voted least likely to move to France.
Yeah.
Was it Moffat when you worked there? Yeah, they. You know what? That the business misses that. They had that set up in such a great way. That was the trading station, and if you ended up in Moose Jaw, it wasn't long before you could have been in Winnipeg, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal.
Well, I'll tell you what, I was really lucky because I was in Moose Jaw. That's where I was from. I was doing evenings one night, and a guy named Gary Russell, who you probably know,
I do,
was in Regina for some reason, changing planes or something, and he heard me. This is the origin story. How I got out of that market is that he was programming Vancouver. He heard me doing the evenings. He said to my boss, "I'm gonna bring this kid out there to do all nights." And I skipped over the Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg step. But yeah, it was a great place to work.
Wow. CHAB didn't have I remember the bumper sticker that was yellow with the red.
That's exactly it. The big yellow sunspot. That's right.
And was Stu Jeffries there? No, he was.
He was a Regina
CJME,
guy.
wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in Regina. But yeah, there was a bunch of broadcasters that came through it. And as Terry said, a lot of guys tried to get a job in Moose Jaw because that was their way of getting a job in some of these bigger markets.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, guys. I'm very, I feel I have mud on my face, but well, like I said, I'm sure Ted will fill me in. So,
Oh yeah, Ted
sorry
was
I
taking
missed it.
notes the entire time.
Yeah, and thanks again, Howard, for having me
Yeah,
on.
man. My pleasure. Thanks, Brad. Thanks,
Great.
Jim.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Take care. Hope
Okay,
that was all right. See ya.
bye-bye.
You're nice people.